Welcome to Series 2, Episode 14 of the In Her Financial Shoes podcast. Welcome to the In Her Financial Shoes podcast with me, Catherine Morgan, founder of The Money Panel, helping you to get financially naked. Listen in each week where we talk about that taboo subject of money. Listen to brutally real-life stories, step into our guest shoes and be left feeling 100% confident and in control. Oh, and we hate financial jargon, so don't expect any here. Small steps, big wins, let's go. Hello, and welcome to the In Her Financial Shoes podcast. So this particular episode is going to be the last one in Series 2, and I've got some little golden nuggets to share with you in terms of how our behaviours influence on, impact on how we actually make investment decisions. But before I go into the actual show, I just wanted to share a couple of things with you. I first of all just wanted to say a massive thank you to everybody who participated in the free Facebook challenge that we ran last week called the Plug Your Money Leaks Challenge. We had almost 200 ladies in there going through daily challenges, daily actions and tasks to get them feeling more financially resilient and in control of their money habits, money relationships, and also building a plan in place to take back control. And we had some absolutely incredible, life-changing testimonials, actually, that some of you left in the challenge. There was one particular lady that told me that for the first 47 years, she was finally heading forward, skipping and excited as she felt in control and able in this newly independent state. I just thought that was absolutely incredible. I screenshotted it. I'm going to frame it on my wall. It's it's when I get testimonials like that I just think it's the reason that I do this. If I can help you to feel more confident and in control and excited about money, then I feel like I have my purpose in life now. So, but the good news is we are actually going to rerun this challenge in September. So for those of you that are interested in joining the September challenge, 5-day challenge, then I will pop a link in the show notes and also in the blog. So if you're listening to this in the car or you're walking around, then if you head over to the website and click into the podcast episode, you'll find a link in there for the waiting list. Now, what's also gone on for me this week, which I wanted to share with you very, very briefly, is that last week I had a super busy week travelling all over the place. I was in London twice last week, once to support a company called First Wealth, who are a wealth-based financial planning company in London. And we held an event last Monday evening where I think we had about 60 or 70 women that were attending. And we were just talking about, we had a panel discussion going on with a couple of other experts around money. And it was really, really interesting. So much came out of the panel discussion about how, we just need to have a little bit of confidence to start making some decisions around our money. And it was a lovely, lovely event. Thank you so much, First Wealth, for inviting me to come onto the panel. And then on Tuesday, I was also at another panel discussion talking about shaping the investment workforce. And we were talking about gender diversity and inclusion, which is another topic that's really close to my heart, because certainly in financial services, there are not as many women in the financial services profession as there are men. And it is important to have gender diversity for lots of different reasons, which I won't go into today. But it was a really, really interesting debate. And then on Saturday, I was at an event in Manchester with a company called Authors & Co. Now, Abigail Horn, who will be coming onto the podcast actually later this year, she'd organised an absolutely incredible event for women. It was called Moments of Inspiration. And I was on the stage as one of the guest experts, and we also had a number of other incredible speakers. I made so many notes with all the sessions that were done on that day. It was just such a lovely, lovely place to be. I met a couple of celebrities there, and just really, really amazing day. Abigail Horn, actually, who runs Authors & Co., she was the company that I that actually co-authored. I did a co-authored book early this year to celebrate the International Women's Day. And the book that I co-authored a chapter in was called The Woman I'm Becoming. Again, you can find a link to that on my website. And we also had we launched the brand new website last week. So we had a lot going on last week, and the 5-day challenge. And the new website, we are starting to make a bit of a pivot in terms of branding, because although the money panel has been where my home has been for the last 18 months, almost 2 years now, I'm starting to build out my personal branding. So we just launched a brand new website, catherinemorgan.com. Go and check it out if you've not had an opportunity to. I'd love to get some feedback from you. And this is where we have actually launched the new Money Circle membership, which has now closed. We've reached 100 founding members, which is really exciting. We will be opening the doors to that membership again later this year. So again, if you're interested in joining that membership, then you can jump onto the waiting list, and we will send you notification of when we're opening the doors again later this year. So just wanted to give you a little bit of an update on what's been going on over the last week. It's been super, super busy. And next week, I'm actually going on holiday. We're going over to Cyprus for a week. So I've pre-recorded some episodes for you so that you don't miss out while I'm away. And I may do a random Facebook Live or something while I'm on holiday, just to see how you're all doing. But without further ado, I will go into this week's episode, which is talking about emotional biases. So in today's episode, we're going to have a look at how important it is to understand your personal emotional relationship with money and how it can affect your behaviours when it comes to investing. Now, this is really super important because a huge factor in being a successful investor is taking planned, deliberate action to avoid common behavioural traps that can lead to bad investment decisions. Now, as human beings, we are all making decisions every single day that don't necessarily make sense because we're driven by emotion. You know, how many times, for example, have you opened up the Amazon app and purchased something completely randomly? Or maybe you purchase another course that you think that you may need because you lack confidence, or you've attended an event because you've been driven by the emotion. Now, these traps are 100% common, and guess what? We're all human and we don't all behave in a logical, rational way. I tell this to my kids every single day. Like, I see them not behaving rationally, and often it's just because they're driven by emotion. So with investing, these behavioural traps are often called investment biases, and they are 100% emotional. But the good news is that actually once you understand them and yourself a little bit better, you'll be able to take that deliberate planned action to avoid these traps. Now, a good place to start is to understand your money habits. So let me explain. I do a lot of work with women to help them understand what I call their personal spending profile. And this can tell us a lot about our relationship with money and how we're likely to behave when it comes to investing. And not just with investing, actually, but this tells us a lot about how we behave around money, how we feel about money, how we act around money, how we behave around money. It's what drives the actual decisions that we're making or not making around money. So when you dig into your spending profile, you actually discover a lot about yourself, a lot about where your belief systems have come from and how you've developed these things called money habits. Now, we all have them. Every single person on the planet has money blocks, money habits, and there's no doubt that they have a massive influence on our lives, because how we feel about money is shaped by lots of things: our family, our friendship groups, our peers, our communities, our religion, even just our personality types, and of course, our own personal experiences. And this means that they are deep-rooted and mostly subconscious. Now, in the work that I do with clients, I use something called the Money Habitudes software, which is an American software which has been designed by a very clever and rather wonderful lady called Sybil Solomon. And now, we've spoken many a times on Zoom and debated for quite some time around the psychology of money. It's an area that I'm particularly fascinated in. Now, in the Money Habitudes work, there are 6 money habitudes, and we all have a combination of either some or all of them. Now, let me just explain. The word habitudes comes from a combination of habits and attitudes. So habitudes is habits and attitudes. So in other words, how we automatically feel about money and how we automatically react or behave around money. Now, often the problem with looking at things like budgeting, or what I like to call spending plans, is, setting up products for example, like pensions and investments, is that actually our behaviours haven't changed. So in order to be more confident with money and to build true wealth and financial happiness, you have to explore the emotional side of your habits and emotions around money, as well as the practical sides. So there are 6 different habitudes. Let me just run through these with you. So we have spontaneous, planning, security, carefree, status, and giving. Now, I'm going to run through these with you in the podcast today. And what I'd love you to do is actually to let me know which one of these do you resonate with the most. And there may be 2 or 3 that you really resonate with, or there may just be 1. Now, when they're combined with investment biases, they can really impact how successful you are when it comes to investing. So let's start with spontaneous. This is something I know a lot about because it used to be one of my strongest money habits. And it kind of means what it says. You know, I used to get a real thrill, emotional thrill from buying something completely unplanned, very spontaneous, very impulsive. And often it's something that I've never thought about buying before. Now, the thrill is great, you know, when I can go shopping and pick up 3 dresses and 2 tops and 2 pairs of shoes that I didn't necessarily need. That was the thrill that I got from spending. But the downside is that if I don't manage that habit, I can massively overspend. And that's what happened to me in my 20s. I massively went into overspend and trying to fill a void in my life because I had lack of self-body confidence. Now, for you listening to this podcast, you may resonate with some of this and really think about, you know, where is the impulse for you? Is it clothes? Is it food? Is it coffees? You know, what is the overspend for you? What is it that you're particularly triggered by? Now, in terms of money habits, this particular bias can link with investment biases. Now, they won't be the same for everybody, but I'll use an example to give you an idea of what I mean. So a couple of investment biases I think that go hand in hand with a spontaneous money habit are self-attribution and illusion of control biases. Now, you can hear more about investment biases actually in some of the previous podcast episodes that we have recorded. We've done 2 or 3 now around investment biases. Episode 5, which was how to overcome the fear of investing with Neil Beige. We talked a lot about investment biases in that particular episode. And then also again in series 2, episode 9 with Daniel Crosby. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to those, do pop back and listen to those ones as well. So with self-attribution and illusion of control biases, this just basically means that you're really overconfident. That, you know, you think that perhaps every investment success is down to the decisions that you've made, and also the opposite. So if things go wrong, or, you know, it's somebody's fault. You know, you don't necessarily blame yourself. You think it's somebody else's fault. That could be the economy, that could be politics, it could be the fund manager. But because you have this self-attribution of being overconfident, you think that when things go wrong, it's somebody else's fault. Now, there's some really interesting research that's been done actually when I was chatting to Rob Moore in series 1 of the podcast, Rob from Red Start. Rob was talking to us about when he does this exercise in schools with children, and then actually for boys, they tend to demonstrate more of an overconfidence than girls, which I think is really, really interesting. Now, typically with someone with a self-attribution and illusion of control bias, you also totally overestimate the control and influence that you have over things that have nothing to do with you. So from an investment perspective, it means that you may take far more risk than you actually should. Now, if you take too much risk, you're likely to end up either feeling kind of super stressed and ironically more out of control, or you may just feel quite anxious then when investment markets start to go up and go down. Probably not so much on the up, but definitely more on the down. So just like spontaneous spenders, you know, it's like buying a really lovely pair of jeans without actually trying them on. You've convinced yourself that they'll suit you because they look amazing on the hanger, even though, you know, if you really thought about it, you know that those types of jeans don't maybe suit you. And do you really need another pair of jeans? Probably not. So with investing, it all comes back to staying true to your goals, true to what are you actually investing for? You know, are you investing for your children's future? Are you investing for your future? What is the intention behind the reason you're investing? Now, what about the planning money habitude? Well, this means that you're generally quite clear on your financial intentions. There's always an intention of acting. You're acting with intention. That doesn't necessarily mean that you get it right, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you actually follow through with that intention. For a lot of ladies that have that come up high in a planning relationship with money, often one of the challenges is that they don't stick to that intention, or they have all good intentions and then don't follow through. I'm sure some of you can probably resonate with some of those things. Now, I think that this habit links quite closely with an anchoring or confirmation investment bias. And this means that we stick firmly to what we believe, and we look for examples that support our beliefs. And we then therefore ignore everything that doesn't support that belief. So the risk for you here is that you stick to a limited range of investments and maybe you don't diversify enough. And this could be because you've heard it from a friend, somebody's been talking about it down the pub, maybe your father or your mother used to invest in these types of investments, and therefore you just firmly stick to what you believe. It could also consequently mean that maybe you've read something in the paper or someone's told you never to invest in the stock market, and because you have this anchoring or confirmation bias, you're just looking for any evidence that confirms that this is true. And you anchor your decision based on maybe a previous experience or something that somebody has told you. So ask yourself, do you really want to pass up an opportunity to invest in something new that may have some potential by limiting yourself to something that maybe you have trusted in the past? Where is the evidence to show that by having that confirmation or anchoring yourself on something that's happened in the past, is that really true? Okay. The next one I want to move on to is security. So many of us have a security money habitude. Now, the upside with this kind of habitude is often we're focused on money being the message of staying safe and feeling in control and feeling secure. Now, the problem with this kind of message or relationship with money is that often that means that we can avoid risk and end up saving so much we don't actually really enjoy living in the moment, or we just stick to cash. So this would be for somebody, perhaps, this goes quite sort of in hand with a planning habitude. If the main message that you're telling yourself when you receive money is that you want to feel secure and safe, then often for those that come up high on this habitude is we end up sticking to cash. And there's been lots of statistics and research thrown around and documented, sorry, not thrown around, but documented, that for women, we do tend to stick to cash more than men. And that's quite frightening because actually, from a financial resilience perspective, we tend to live longer than men. Now, if we're sticking to cash that's not likely to grow, then that's a problem. That's a real problem. Now, I associate 3 different investment biases with a security money habit. First of all, there's something called loss aversion. So this is where you're so keen to avoid losing the money that you've invested that you just don't take enough or any risk at all. The other investment bias here is something called familiarity bias. So this means that you stick with and you limit yourself to what you know, what is familiar. So if premium bonds, for example, are really familiar and you're combining this with loss aversion because you don't want to lose any risk, then that's often what happens is we see that ladies will stick with things they're familiar with and things that won't create any loss. So like before, you don't maybe spread your money across different investments, or maybe don't even invest at all. And that's one of the challenges that we have with having this type of habitude. And thirdly, there's something called hindsight bias. Now, hindsight is a wonderful thing, and it's definitely true with investing. If we all had a crystal ball, we'd all be trillionaires, but life is just not like that. So the problem is that if we start believing that we should have been able to anticipate and avoid losses, then we get really confused or massively worried and anxious about our own abilities. And so we just avoid it completely. We just bury our heads in the sand and say, that's not for us. We don't feel confident enough to make that decision. Now, it all comes down to anxiety about the perceived risk of investing. Have you ever come across the acronym for FEAR? I love this acronym. So FEAR equals false evidence appearing real. False evidence appearing real. So how many times have you waited for change because you fear that the worst might happen. Often worse than trying is failing to try. You just have to say yes and think about how to do it later. Get perfect later. Start now, get perfect later. Great book, by the way. Would highly recommend you reading that one. So with investment risk, there's actually more risk to your long-term financial well-being if you don't take investment risk. But a lot of this is down to confidence. And I really hope that by the end of this investment series, you have been able to build up some level of confidence to actually get started. Now, onto the carefree habitude. So the carefree money habitude is also down to a lot of lack of confidence as a downside. But this is more because you just don't think it's important to learn about managing your money. Or maybe you do, but you just don't really consider money to be particularly serious. Maybe money was never talked about in your household. Maybe it was talked about way too much in your household, and therefore you've gone completely, you're sort of rebelling against that and just be like, nah, just really not bothered about it. Or maybe it's just not a priority for you. And again, that can come back to confidence. You won't treat something as a priority if you don't have the confidence to understand it. So if we use a kind of clothing analogy here, many of us, might use baggy or way too comfortable clothes to mask perhaps some body confidence issues. Or maybe we're just not that bothered about what we wear. Now, with your investments, you don't have to let the lack of confidence limit the potential that you can make by making some decisions to take some action. But it is all about doing your research, using the tools and the guidance that's available to you out there, starting small, getting started and sticking to some simple rules that we've talked about through the investment podcast, this particular series, and you'll be really amazed at what you can achieve. So finally, let's look at the status money habitude. Now, the status money habitude is an interesting one. I don't see this come up particularly high. I would say if I was to take a kind of common results from most people that I coach, I would say status tends to come up the least. But status, the message in this is around making a good impression. And that could be that we focus perhaps on more expensive tastes or brands, or it could be very much related to the relationship you had with money growing up, where potentially, for me, for example, my dad was wealthy and my mum wasn't, because my parents split up when I was very little, and therefore we lived at home with my mum. She gave us everything that we needed, all like safe and stability and everything that we needed. But when we went to my dad's, it was all about the big house and the nice cars. So very status driven, I would say there. But interestingly, my dad's never been bothered about expensive clothes. We'd often go to the fruit and veg market in Hitchin when we were kids, and he would very rarely spend a lot of his wealth on clothing, for example, whereas that's where I spent my money. But he did not like to live in a nice house and have a nice car. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to have a status money habit. It just can sometimes mean that the money message is that it's all about making a good impression. So using a fashion analogy, then you may be somebody who's perhaps a brand follower. But it can be stressful to keep up with the latest fashions, and you probably buy expensive stuff for appearance sake, perhaps not because you need it or because it suits you, but perhaps you're trying to feel in a position of confidence or in control. Maybe this is relevant for you if you're trying to get up the ladder from a career perspective. Now, the trend chasing investment bias is quite similar to this. So this means that we make the mistake of thinking that just because somebody else has done well in the past or is doing it right now, that's the place that you should be investing. So Bitcoin is a really good example here. Bitcoin, what a good 12 months, 18 months ago was the rage. It was the trend. Everybody was buying Bitcoin. But the fact is that Bitcoin was not necessarily the right thing for a lot of people. More complicated and much higher risk to be going into something like Bitcoin. Yet because it was the trend and everybody was investing in this, this touches upon another investment bias called herd mentality. Everybody's just following the crowd, following the herd. So you're probably starting to see a pattern emerge here. Now, we can deal with our money habits and investment biases by just simply understanding how they may have a negative impact on us, how they may hold us back with making that first step. And then taking some of those deliberate planned actions I talked about earlier really come down to three main things. The first one is remembering your goals. Adjusting them if things change in your life. But the point is knowing where you're headed. Where are you headed in the first place? What are you investing for? Going back to the good old principles of giving every pound a purpose, giving every pound a job, understanding what is the reason why you're saving and investing in the first place, and relating the level of risk that you're taking to that purpose. So if, for example, your purpose is to put some money aside for Christmas, then clearly you don't want to have any uncertainty with what's that pot of money is going to be worth in 6 months' time. Whereas if you are, let's say you were investing for your son's university fees and he's currently 2 and he would go to university in 16 years' time, then you have got some time to think about having a little bit of uncertainty, or perhaps a lot of uncertainty, certainly in the earlier years. But as you approach that particular financial intention, then the level of uncertainty you may want to reduce. And the great thing about investing is that you don't have to stick in the same fund forever. As you're coming up to the time when you're needing to utilise that money, then you can start to think about reducing the level of uncertainty. The second key point I would say is knowing how much investment risk or uncertainty is right for you and your goals. So what I just talked about there, really. Number 3 is diversifying your investments, making sure you don't limit your options and having a good spread of different types of investments. I think the core message here is sticking with something that's simple and straightforward. With your first investment, something that's very vanilla, something that is, a well-diversified investment bucket. You can't go wrong with that approach. And building on the sexy stuff later. If you want to explore things like gold or Bitcoin, or things like that, then making sure it's, first of all, a regulated investment is super important. Making sure that the provider you're choosing is regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA. But making sure that you've just got a very basic portfolio in place, and then you can build on that later. Now, I haven't mentioned the giving habitude yet, and this isn't because it's not important. Far from it. All our habits are important, but it's because this is the one that's most likely to affect the type of investment that you choose, which is what we're talking about here, rather than the way that you choose them. So let me explain. The giving habit means that you're likely to have potentially strong ethics and integrity, and perhaps more likely to save for other people before yourself, because the giving habitude is all about helping others. Now, this is a really common habitude for women in particular, putting others first before ourselves. And often we can attach feelings of guilt and shame with money when we're actually spending on ourselves, but absolutely fine to look after everybody else. Who can resonate with that one? So when this translates into investing, it means that you may want to avoid investing in companies or funds that have any association with things like tobacco or fossil fuels or weapons, for example. Now, the good news is there are loads of ways that you can do this by investing in things called ethical or socially responsible funds. And there are company shares or funds that consider social or environmental good as well as trying to make you money at the same time. Now, you can find out more about this in episode 8 of series 2, where we actually went into some detail around socially responsible investments. And exactly the same rules of thumb apply, knowing your intentions, knowing your goals, thinking about diversifying and reducing your risk by diversifying, and just being super, super clear on what you're investing for in the first place. Okay, so I hope this has been useful to understanding some of the deep-rooted habits and beliefs and biases that can affect your behaviours. And I've said many times, money creates an emotional response in all of us, and our reactions are highly personal. But as long as you're aware of the potential pitfalls and stick to the simple rules of thumb, you can enjoy plenty of success. You've been listening to Catherine Morgan's In Her Financial Shoes podcast. If you enjoyed this show, I'd love it if you could leave me a review on iTunes. And don't forget, if you're feeling stuck and overwhelmed and want to learn more about being financially resilient, confident and in control, head over to www.catherinemorgan.com.